The heavy oak doors of the gilded spur slammed shut behind Elara Thorne with a finality that echoed the crack of her father's voice moments before. The jeers of Sagebrush Hollow's late afternoon crowd, momentarily silenced by Caleb Thorne's pronouncement, erupted anew as she stumbled into the blinding street. Dust, thick and red as dried blood, puffed around her worn boots. Her father's words, flung like stones into the sudden quiet of the saloon, still seared her mind. "You're a blight on this family. Useless. Unmarriageable. You're no daughter of mine any longer. You belong with the trash." The shame was a physical weight, heavier even than her own body, pressing her down into the unforgiving dirt of Main Street. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I got something extra special saved just for you. The late sun, a swollen, angry orange, hung low over the jagged teeth of the Sawtooth Range, bathing Sagebrush Hollow in a light that felt accusatory. Elara, 22 summers old and shaped unlike the delicate silhouettes favored in Eastern fashion plates or the wiry frames of frontier women, stood rooted in the dust-choked street. Her simple calico dress, strained at the seams and torn near the shoulder from her father's rough handling, felt like a shroud. Every whisper from the boardwalk, "Look at her." Caleb finally done it. Where's he going to put that? Scraped against her raw nerves. She kept her gaze fixed on the rutted earth, the familiar scent of horse dung, dust, and cheap whiskey thick in her nose. Her cheeks burned hotter than the sun-baked adobe walls flanking the street. Caleb Thorne, a man whose wealth was etched in the silver streaks of his handlebar mustache and the cold flint in his eyes, stood framed in the saloon doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the light. Beside him, dwarfed by Caleb's imposing presence yet radiating a different kind of solidity, stood Jace. He was a man built like the stubborn mesas dotting the horizon, broad, weathered, and silent. Scars, pale against his sun-bronzed skin, traced paths down his neck and vanished beneath the coarse fabric of his homespun shirt. His eyes, a startlingly clear gray beneath thick brows, held no mockery, only a deep, unsettling stillness as they regarded Elara. He was Caleb's property, bought cheap after a silver mine collapse buried his freedom along with his comrades. Indentured labor, Caleb called it, slavery by another name. The town knew. "Take her." Caleb's voice boomed, devoid of anything resembling paternal warmth. He gestured dismissively at Elara, with a hand calloused from reins and rigging. "The old Miller place. You know it. She's your problem now, Jace. See if you can't make something useful out of that. Excess. Break her spirit if you have to." A cruel smile touched his lips. "Consider it part of settling your debt." Jace didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, a short, sharp movement. He moved toward Elara, his worn boots scuffing the dirt. She flinched, instinctively shrinking back, bracing for the blow, the shove, the vitriol she'd come to expect. Her breath hitched, catching the dust and scent of old leather and sun-warmed skin as he stopped an arm's length away. "Come," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle, like stones shifting in a deep creek. He didn't touch her. He simply turned and started walking toward the livery stable at the end of the street, where a single, bony mule stood hitched to a ramshackle cart piled with meager supplies, a worn blanket roll, a dented canteen, sacks of beans and flour. Elara hesitated, the townsfolk's stares like physical pressure. Her gaze flickered past Jace's, retreating back to the saloon window. Behind the smudged glass, Maeve, the grizzled but kind-hearted owner of the gilded spur, met her eyes. Maeve's weathered face was etched with sorrow and helpless anger. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a warning to stay silent, to endure. Her mouth formed silent words. "Go on, child." Maeve's sympathy was a small, cold ember in the vast tundra of Elara's humiliation, but it was something. Elara forced her leaden legs to move. Stumbling after Jace, the dust devil swirling mockingly around her ankles. Imagine being cast out, not by strangers, but by your own blood, The shame, the fear, the unknown. What's the first thing you'd hold on to for hope? Share your thoughts below. The journey to the Miller place was a slow, silent torment under the fading light. The mule plodded, the cart groaned on its ancient axles, and the vast emptiness of the sagebrush flats pressed in. Elara walked beside the cart, her feet aching in ill-fitting shoes, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel, the sigh of the wind through dry grasses, and the distant cry of a hawk. Jace walked ahead, leading the mule, his posture rigid, offering no conversation, no reassurance, no cruelty. His silence was a wall. Was he disgusted? Resigned? Planning how to fulfill Caleb's brutal order to break her? She imagined a failing outpost, a ruin, no doubt, a prison for the unwanted. Her father hadn't just discarded her. He'd sentenced her to desolation with a man whose past was a closed book and whose present was servitude. The wind, carrying the sharp, clean scent of sage, felt like the breath of a world indifferent to her despair. The Miller homestead appeared as dusk began to stain the sky purple and orange. It was worse than she'd imagined. Not a ranch, barely an outpost. A sagging, single-room cabin built of crumbling adobe, its roof patched with warped timber and sod. A skeletal corral held together by hope and frayed ropes stood nearby. A well with a rusted crank. And dust. Everywhere. It whispered across the hard-packed earth, coated the few stunted junipers, and filled the air with a fine, gritty haze that stung the eyes. Jace unhitched the mule silently, leading it toward the corral. Elara stood frozen near the cart, overwhelmed by the desolation. This was her future. A crushing weight settled on her chest, heavier than her own body. Broken. Her father's voice sneered in her mind. Useless. Tears, hot and humiliating, welled up, blurring the harsh landscape. She fought them, biting her lip until she tasted copper. A shadow fell across her. She flinched. Jace stood beside her, holding out the dented canteen. Water sloshed inside. "Drink," he said, the single word rough but not unkind. His gray eyes held hers for a moment, and in their depths she saw not the expected contempt, but a flicker of something else, recognition, understanding of a different sort of burden. Stunned, she took the canteen, her fingers trembling. The water was warm but clean, washing away some of the dust and the metallic taste of fear. He didn't watch her drink, turning instead to unload the cart with economical movements. He pulled out the worn blanket roll and placed it near the cabin door. "Shelter's poor, but it's tight," he stated, his back to her. "Wind don't get all the way in." He didn't say we or you're safe, but the offering of water, the implied sharing of the meager shelter, the absence of malice, it was a language she hadn't expected. A fragile, bewildering ember of something other than cruelty sparked in the ashes of her shame. Later, as the first stars pricked the velvet sky, Jace worked on a section of the corral fence where the wood had rotted. He didn't ask for help. Elara watched in the cabin doorway, the worn blanket draped over her shoulders against the cooling desert air. She saw him pause, his hand slipping inside his shirt. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket on a leather thong, holding it for a moment in his calloused palm, staring at it in the twilight with an expression profound, silent sorrow before tucking it away. A past, a loss. He was more than just Caleb's property. He carried his own chains. Hesitantly, driven by a confusing mix of gratitude for the water and a desperate need to prove she wasn't entirely useless, Elara approached. A few lengths of discarded rope lay nearby, frayed but salvageable. Without a word, her face burning with self-consciousness, she picked them up. Her fingers, accustomed to finer needlework now lost to her, fumbled at first. But the repetitive motion of braiding the strands together, strengthening them, was calming. She held out the newly braided rope when she finished, her eyes downcast, offering it for the fence repair. Jace looked from the rope to her face, his expression unreadable in the gathering gloom. He took it, a beat of silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets and the mournful sigh of the wind. "Stronger now," he murmured, his voice gravelly. It wasn't praise, exactly. It was an observation, an acknowledgement. He turned back to the fence, using the rope she'd braided to secure a splint to the rotten post. Inside the dark cabin, Jace lit a small lantern. Its flickering, buttery light pushed back the shadows, revealing a cramped, dusty space. A crude stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, 2 stools, a single cot pile with straw. He hung the lantern on a hook by the door. Its light was weak, vulnerable against the vast darkness outside. But it was light. Elara placed her blanket on the cot, a silent question hanging in the air about sleeping arrangements. He gestured towards the cot. "You take it." He moved toward the hearth, pulling his own thin bedroll from his pack, clearly intending the hard-packed dirt floor. "Jace." Elara started, her voice small. Why the kindness?" The question tumbled out, raw and desperate. "He told you to break me." Jace paused, his back to her, silhouetted by the lantern's glow. He didn't turn. "Ain't about kindness," he said, his voice low and tight. "Ain't about him. Just ain't the way." He offered no further explanation, the weight of unspoken history heavy in his tone. He settled his bedroll near the cold hearth, a solitary figure swallowed by the encroaching shadows beyond the lantern's fragile circle. A flicker of trust in the darkest place. What would you make of Jace's actions? Is it pity, hidden strength, or something else? Let me know your theories. Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next in this harsh land. Exhaustion, physical and emotional, finally pulled Elara towards a crude cot. The straw crackled beneath her. She reached out to extinguish the lantern, plunging them into near-total darkness save for the faint starlight filtering through a crack in the shutter. As her fingers brushed the warm metal base of the lantern, a movement caught her eye through that same crack. Outside, beyond the sagging fence she'd helped repair, near the silhouette of the well, a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom beneath a stunted juniper. Not an animal. A man, tall, lean, standing unnaturally still. Moonlight glinted briefly off metal. A spur? A gun belt buckle? His face was in darkness, but his posture was one of intense focus, his gaze fixed unwaveringly not on the cabin, but on the spot where Jace lay sleeping on the floor near the hearth. As Elara watched, frozen, the figure leaned forward slightly, his lips moving silently. The wind carried a fragmented whisper, 2 harsh syllables that sliced through the night air before the man melted back into shadows. Barlow? Dawn bled pale gray over the desolate Miller homestead, but Elara hadn't slept. The whispered name, Barlow, echoed louder than the coyotes' yips in the stillness. Every creak of the sagging timbers, every rustle of dry sage against the cabin wall, felt like the approach of that shadowed figure. She lay rigid on the straw cot, her gaze fixed on the crack in the shutter, where the moonlight had betrayed the watcher, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Jace, a still mound on the dirt floor near the cold hearth, seemed carved from stone. What ghosts haunted this quiet man? And were they coming for him? For her? The harsh reality of the homestead pressed in with the morning light. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sun piercing the gloom, illuminating the cabin's stark poverty. The rough-hewn table, the chipped crockery, the pervasive smell of earth, decay, and Jace's worn leather. Elara pushed herself up, every muscle protesting the previous day's humiliation and the long walk. Shame, that familiar, suffocating cloak, settled heavily upon her. Useless, unwanted. Her father's words were branded onto her soul. How could she possibly contribute here, in this place of ruin, with this man bound by his own chains? The weight of her body felt like another failure. She found Jace already outside, hauling water from the recalcitrant well. The rusty crank groaned in protest, a sound that scraped Elara's raw nerves. He didn't acknowledge her beyond a brief glance, his expression unreadable in the cool morning light. The gray eyes held no warmth, but crucially, no malice either. Just that intense, watchful stillness. The fear of the night watchman warred with the crushing sense of her own inadequacy. What could she do? Spying a patch of earth near the cabin's leeward side, less choked by dust, Elara noticed a few stubborn, weed-choked sprouts pushing through, remnants of a long-abandoned garden. Without asking, driven by a desperate need to do something, be something other than a burden, she knelt. The earth was hard, unforgiving clay beneath her fingers. She began pulling weeds, her movements clumsy at first, her breath coming in short puffs. The sun climbed, warming her back, the scent of crushed sage and dry earth filling her nostrils. It was menial, dirty work, the kind her father's hired hands performed. Yet, as she cleared a small square, revealing the hopeful green beneath, a flicker, fragile as a moth's wing, stirred within her. Not useless. Not yet. Jace paused in his task, watching her for a long moment. He didn't speak, didn't offer advice. He simply fetched a rusted, short-handled hoe from the lean-to and placed it silently beside her patch of earth before returning to the well. The gesture, small and practical, felt like a lifeline thrown across a chasm. Acceptance, perhaps, or simple pragmatism. Either way, it eased a fraction of the weight on her chest. That name, Barlow. Who do you think he is? A ghost from Jace's past? A threat sent by Caleb? Or something else entirely? Share your theories in the comments. Days blurred into a rhythm of shared silence and labor. Elara tended the garden patch with fierce determination, coaxing life from the reluctant soil. She learned to haul water, the heavy bucket straining her arms but bringing a strange satisfaction. Jace worked tirelessly, repairing the corral with the rope she'd braided, reinforcing the sagging cabin door, checking perimeter with a vigilance that never fully eased. He taught her practical things. How to tie a knot that wouldn't slip under strain, how to bank a fire to last a night, how to spot the subtle signs of a rattler in the brush. His instructions were terse, delivered in that low rumble, but patient. He never mentioned the shadow, the whisper. But Elara saw the way his hand would sometimes drift unconsciously to the small lump beneath his shirt where the locket lay hidden, his gaze growing distant, fixed on the horizon where the sawtooth range clawed at the sky. One afternoon, as they sat in the shade of the lean-to, sharing coarse bread and water, Elara gathered her courage. The sun beat down, baking the red earth, the air thick with the drone of cicadas and the scent of hot sage. "Jace," she began, her voice tentative. "Last night, that man," he said. Barlow. Jace froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. The stillness that settled over him wasn't his usual quiet. It was the stillness of a predator sensing danger. His gray eyes, when they met hers, were chips of flint. "Don't matter," he stated, his voice flat, final. He looked away, his jaw clenched tight. "It matters if he means you harm," Elara pressed, surprising herself at her own persistence. If he comes here." Jace was silent for a long time, staring out at the shimmering heat haze distorting the flats. When he spoke again, his voice was rough, scraped raw. Knew him. In the mines. Silver Dust Gulch. He paused, the name hanging heavy. Partner. Supposed to be. He touched the hidden locket through his shirt. Had a sister. Sarah. This was hers. Gave it to me for luck. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Barlow. He cut the supports. Cave in. Took Sarah. Took others. The words were stark, devoid of embellishment. Yet they carried the weight of mountains collapsing. Ran. Before the dust settled. Took what wasn't his. He fell silent. The unspoken horror of betrayal and loss a palpable thing between them. He offered no more, retreating behind the wall of his silence. But the fragment was devastating. It explained the scars, the indentured servitude, the hunted look. Barlow wasn't just a ghost. He was the architect of Jace's ruin. The revelation changed the air. Elara saw the vigilance in a new light. His kindness wasn't just decency. It was a man clinging to his humanity against a tide of darkness. Her fear of him dissolved entirely, replaced by a fierce, protective empathy. She didn't press further. Some wounds were too deep to probe. 3 days later, a welcome, furtive visitor arrived just before dusk. Maeve. She came on a sway-backed mare, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth clutched to her chest, her eyes scanning the horizon nervously. "Child," she breathed, dismounting and embracing Elara tightly. She smelled of baking bread and cheap perfume, a comforting assault on the homestead's austerity. "Look at you." Her gaze took in Elara's sun-touched face, her dusty but whole dress, the small patch of green defiance. Holding up. Good. Inside the dim cabin, Maeve unpacked her bundle. A loaf of fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, a small jar of preserves, and a thick woolen shawl. "For the nights," she said, pressing the shawl into Elara's hands. Her eyes darted to Jace, who stood near the door, watchful. "Heard things, Elara," she murmured, her voice low. "Caleb, he's not just being cruel. He's making moves, talking hard with Silas Rourke." Silas Rourke was the owner of the vast diamond, our ranch bordering Thorne land to west, a man known for his ruthless ambition and iron-fisted control. Word is, Caleb's leverage near everything, including the sorry patch. Maeve gestured around the cabin. "In some deal, wants Rourke's backing for something big. Political, maybe. Town council's got seats opening." She lowered her voice further. "And they're talking about him." She nodded towards Jace. Rourke's foreman was in the spur, bragging about knowing a man who'd pay good money for a traitorous miner named Jace. Mentioned Barlow. Said he's got powerful friends now. Jace's face remained impassive, but Elara saw the subtle tightening around his eyes. Caleb wasn't just discarding her. He was using her exile, Jace's presence, and likely Jace's past, as pawns in a larger, dangerous game. The Miller land, worthless to her, was a bargaining chip. Caleb's schemes run deep. How far will he go for power? And what does Rourke really want? Hit subscribe now. The secrets of Sagebrush Hollow are about to unravel. After Maeve left, promising to return when she could, Elara felt a renewed sense of urgency. Caleb's cruelty had a purpose, and it entangled Jace's past with her present prison. While Jace was out checking the perimeter fence line later that evening, Elara decided to tackle the thick layer of grime coating the cabin's single, small window. Kneeling on the dirt floor, she scrubbed with a damp rag. As she worked near the crude stone hearth, her hand brushed against a loose stone low down in the wall. It shifted slightly. Curiosity overcoming caution, she pried it free. Behind it, in a shallow cavity, lay a single sheet of folded paper, brittle and yellowed. Her breath caught. Unfolding it carefully, she squinted in the fading light. It wasn't a letter, but a crudely drawn map. It showed the Miller homestead, the well, and the corral, but also marked a specific spot near the western boundary, deep in a ravine choked with scrub oak. Scrawled beside it, in ink faded to brown, were words that turned her blood to ice. Thorne's marker. Claim void if undiscovered by solstice. Rourke holds a deed. Seal the deal. Below, a date was written next week. Caleb hadn't just given Jace this land. He was gambling with it. He needed something on this land found by a deadline to secure his deal with Rourke, and he deliberately sent him here, perhaps hoping Jace would find it, perhaps not caring if they lived or died in the process. The land wasn't just a prison. It was a ticking clock in Caleb's ruthless game. Elara clutched the damning paper, its implications burning. Caleb's scheme was vaster, colder than she'd imagined. He was playing with fire, and they were caught in the blaze. She needed to show Jace. Now, she scrambled to her feet, the map crumpled in her fist. As she turned towards the door, a heavy fist slammed against the warped wood, rattling it violently on its leather hinges. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. Elara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. A voice, harsh and unfamiliar, laced with cold threat, sliced through the thin panel. "Jace, open up. Barlow sends his regards, and a message. Your time for hiding? It's run out." The silence that followed was thicker than the adobe walls, charged with the violence that hadn't yet broken. Outside, the wind sighed through the sagebrush. carrying the scent of dust and impending storm. The heavy fist slammed against the warpwood again, a thunderclap in the cabin's fragile silence. Elara flinched, the brittle map crumpling in her fist like a captured bird's wing. Jace moved with the lethal cry of a mountain cat, placing himself squarely between her and the door. His hand didn't reach the knife at his belt. It hovered, a promise of violence held in check. His gray eyes, usually still waters, blazed with cold, defiant fire that seemed to dare the unseen threat to cross the threshold. "Stay back," he breathed, the words barely audible over Elara's own frantic heartbeat. The silence that followed the pounding stretched, taut as a bowstring. Dust motes danced in the sliver of fading light, cutting through the shutter crack. Then the harsh voice came again, laced with venom and something else, anticipation. "Know you're in there, Jace. Barlow ain't forgot silver dust. Says debts come due, with interest. You got till sundown tomorrow. Be gone, or be buried where you stand." A boot scuffed dirt outside. He knows about the woman. Thorne's cast-off won't shield you. Think on it. Heavy footsteps retreated, crunching on gravel, fading into the sigh of the evening wind through the sagebrush. Jace didn't relax. He stood rigid, listening until the sounds vanished completely. Only then did the fierce light in his eyes dim, replaced by the familiar, weary vigilance. He turned, his gaze locking onto the crumpled paper in Elara's hand. "What's that?" Her voice trembled as she smoothed the brittle map on the rough table. "I found it, behind a loose stone. It's why we're here." She pointed to the markings, the homestead, the ravine, the damning words. Thorne's marker, claim void if undiscovered by solstice. Rourke holds the deed. Seal the deal. The solstice, that's next week. Caleb needs something found here to make his deal with Rourke stick. He sent you, maybe hoping you'd stumble on it. The betrayal tasted like ashes. Jay studied the map, his scarred finger tracing the ravine line. His expression was grim, unreadable. "Rourke," he muttered, the name like a curse. Bitter water flows together. Figures. He looked up, his eyes meeting Elara's. This ravine, dangerous ground. Slide, snakes. Caleb wouldn't risk his own neck. But he'd risk ours, Elara finished, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "What is it? What's the marker? Gold? Papers?" "Could be anything that proves a claim," Jay said, his voice low. "Or something Rourke wants buried. Only one way to know." He folded the map carefully, tucking it inside his shirt. "We go." At first light, fear warred with a fierce, burgeoning resolve within Elara. "I'm coming with you." Jace shook his head, a quick, sharp movement. "Too dangerous. You stay. Bolt the door." "No." The word surprised her with its force. She met his gaze squarely, the shame that had once bowed her shoulders replaced by a desperate need to fight back against the trap her father had sprung. "This is my prison, too. My fight now. I found the map. I can help. I'm stronger than I look." The last part was a whisper, a challenge to the old narrative. Jay stared at her, a flicker of surprise in his gray eyes. He saw the determination hardening her features, the way she held herself taller. After a long moment, a curt nod. "Stay close. Do as I say. Barlow's deadline is set. What deal did he strike with Rourke? Is it revenge or something more? Share your theories below." Dawn painted the sky in bruised purples and pinks as they set out, the air crisp and carrying the sharp scent of sage and damp earth. The ravine marked on the map lay a hard hour's walk west, a jagged scar on the landscape hidden behind crumbling mesas. Jace moved with silent purpose, scanning the horizon constantly, his hand never far from the worn grip of his knife. Elara struggled to keep pace, her breath pluming in the cool air, the unfamiliar terrain treacherous underfoot. Loose scree skittered beneath her boots. Thorny mesquite snagged at her patched skirt. The vastness of the land, indifferent and potentially hostile, pressed in on her. They descended into the ravine cautiously. It was deeper, darker than the map suggested. Tangled scrub oak and juniper choked the narrow floor, their roots like gnarled fingers clutching the steep, dusty walls. Sunlight struggled to penetrate, dappling the ground in shifting patterns. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp stone and decay. Jace paused, holding up a hand. A dry, buzzing rattle echoed from the shadows beneath a rock ledge nearby. Elara froze, her blood turning to ice. Jace picked up a long, sturdy branch, moving slowly, deliberately, tapping the ground ahead. The rattling intensified, then ceased as the unseen serpent retreated into deeper cover. He glanced back at Elara, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, swallowing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. Stronger, she reminded herself, stepping carefully where he pointed. Following the map's crude markings led them to a section where the ravine wall had partially collapsed, creating a sheltered overhang half buried in debris. Jace began digging cautiously, using his hands and the branch to shift loose earth and rock. Elara joined him, ignoring the bite of grit under her nails, the strain in her back. The shared labor, the focused silence punctuated only by their breathing and the shifting earth, felt strangely intimate, a bond forged in shared defiance. Their fingers scraped against something solid, not rock, but rough-hewn wood. They cleared more earth, revealing the corner of a small, sturdy crate, buried deep. Using the branch as a lever, Jace pried it loose. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, were several items, a bundle of official-looking land deeds bearing Silas Rourke's sprawling signature, a smaller, folded document stamped with territorial seal, and a heavy leather pouch. Jace emptied the pouch into his palm. Gold coins, perhaps 24, gleamed dully in the filtered light, but it was a folded document that drew his attention. It was a bill of sale, dated years prior, transferring mineral rights for a large parcel, including the Miller land from an old prospector named Elias Miller to Caleb Thorne. The signature looked smudged, forced, forged. Jay stated flatly, his voice tight with disgust. Caleb stole this land. Rourke's backing him, holding the forged deed as leverage until Caleb delivers his marker, proof the claim's valid by Solstice, probably needing Rourke's witness. Finding this crate here validates it was Miller's find, Caleb's purchase. He gestured to the coins. Hush money for Miller, maybe, or Rourke's cut. He picked up one of the land deeds. But why the Solstice? Why the urgency? As he spoke, Elara's gaze fell on something else nestled beneath the oilcloth wrappings at the very bottom of the crate. A glint of tarnished silver. She reached in, her fingers brushing cold metal. She pulled it out. It was a locket, small, oval, tarnished silver, identical in shape and size to the one Jace wore beneath his shirt. Her breath caught. Jace, look. Jace froze, his eyes locking onto the locket in her palm. All color drained from his face. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he took it. He turned it over. On the back, barely visible through tarnish, was an engraved S. Sarah. His fingers closed around it, knuckles white, a raw, choked sound escaping him. It was a twin to his own, the one Sarah had given him for luck. Barlow hadn't just caused a cave-in. He'd looted the dead, stolen the last piece of Jace's sister. 2 lockets, one buried secret. What does this mean for Jace's past? And will they beat the Solstice deadline? Subscribe now. The race against time is on. The discovery hung heavy in the cool ravine air, a silent testament to Barlow's cruelty and the tangled web connecting Caleb, Rourke, and Jace's tragedy. They carefully repacked everything except Sarah's locket and the bill of sale, reburying the crate. Jay slipped Sarah's locket into his pocket beside his own, the weight seeming to bow his shoulders for a moment. Elara tucked the damning bill of sale deep inside her bodice. The walk back to the homestead was tense, the revelations settling like dust. They moved faster, urgency replacing caution. As they crested the final rise, the Miller cabin came into view below. Relief was short-lived. Tied the corral post wasn't Jace's bony mule, but 3 powerful, sweat-lather horses. Men, 3 of them, dressed in the rough, practical garb of ranch hands, but carrying themselves with the coiled readiness of hired guns, stood near the cabin door. One, a tall man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, was examining the ground near the well, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered 6-shooter. Before Elara or Jace could react, the man by the well straightened up. He spotted them on the ridge. A cruel smile split his face. He cupped his hands around his mouth, his voice, loud and triumphant, echoing across the scrubland, shattering the fragile peace. Well, look what the buzzards led us to. Found you, traitor, and brought Thorne's little heifer back too. Rourke wanted a word, and Barlow sends his personal regards. The other 2 men whirled, hands dropping to their guns, their eyes fixed on Jace and Elara, silhouetted against the morning sky. Escape routes vanished. The fragile sanctuary of the homestead was now a deadly trap. Dust, kicked up by the intruder's horses, stung Elara's eyes as she pressed instinctively closer to Jace. The ridge offered no cover, only exposure under the pitiless sun. 3 guns glinted, unwavering, aimed at Jace's heart. The scarred man's sneer widened, revealing yellow teeth. Hands high, traitor, he barked, his voice rough as gravel. Slow, or the woman learns what lead tastes like. Jace's body was a coiled spring against hers, radiating controlled fury, his gray eyes fixed on the scarred man like a hawk sighting prey. Time seemed to slow, measured by the frantic drumming of Elara's heart against the damning bill of sail hidden in her bodice. Jace didn't raise his hands. His voice, when it came, was low, deceptively calm, carrying across the tense distance. Rourke sends boys to do a man's work. Where's Barlow? Hiding behind his boss's skirts. The scarred man bristled. Barlow's got his own reckoning plan for you. Minor. We're just here to collect the package. Rourke wants that marker found. Now! He gestured sharply with his gun towards the cabin. Move. Jace took a half-step sideways, subtly shielding Elara more completely. Markers buried deep. Takes knowing where to look. You shoot me, you dig for weeks. Rourke won't thank you for missing his deadline. He paused, letting the implication hang. We go inside. Talk. Or you explain to Silas why his deal's buried with my corpse. His gaze flickered to the youngest of the 3 men, whose hand trembled slightly on his 6-shooter's grip. A weakness. The scarred man hesitated, his eyes narrowing. The solstice deadline was his leash. He spat into the dust. Fine. Talk. But any tricks? She dies first. He jerked his chin toward Elara. Inside. Now. Hand where I can see him. Inside the cramped cabin, the air thickened with tension and the smell of unwashed men in leather. Jace positioned himself near the cold hearth, subtly placing himself between Elara and the door. The scarred man leaned against the table, his gun loosely aimed, while his companions guarded the exits. Talk fast, he growled. The marker, Jace stated flatly, it's proof Caleb Thorne bought stolen land. Forged papers. Rourke's holding the fake deed, waiting for proof the claim's valid by solstice. Finding it here seals Caleb's deal. He deliberately omitted the crate's contents and location. Digging it up takes time. Specific spot. Caleb didn't exactly draw us a map. Why should Rourke care how Thorne got the land? One of the younger men asked, confused. Because Elara spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt, drawing their startled attention. My father's promising Rourke political sway, maybe territorial contracts, in exchange for backing his claim. If the land's proven stolen, Rourke's backing a thief. Ruins them both. She saw the flicker of understanding, then calculation in the scarred man's eyes. Rourke's reputation mattered. Where is it? The scarred man demanded. West Ravine, Jay said, keeping it vague. Deep. Needs daylight and care to extract without destroying it. We go at dawn. You watch. Jace bought them a night. Can they outsmart Rourke's men and escape? Or is Dawn a death sentence? Share your escape plan predictions below. The scarred man grudgingly agreed, posting guards outside. Trapped, Elara and Jace sat in tense silence near the hearth. As dusk bled into night, Jace finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. The lockets. He pulled both from his pocket, his own and Sarah's, the tarnished silver gleaming faintly in the gloom. Barlow didn't just leave her. He robbed her, sold her things, likely to men like Rourke, for coin to disappear. The raw pain in his low voice was a physical thing in the small space. She won a place. Just a small homestead. Somewhere the dust didn't choke you. He closed his fist around the lockets. Barlow took that. Caleb and Rourke. They're just different sides of the same greedy coin. Elara's hand found his clenched fist, her touch tentative. We'll stop them, she whispered, the conviction surprising her. We have the proof. The bill of sale. She touched her bodice. We just need to get it to someone who matters, before the solstice. Jace looked at her, really looked in the dimness. The shame that once clouded her eyes was replaced by a fierce, determined light. How? He asked, not doubting, but seeking the plan he sensed forming. Not through the front door, Elara murmured, her mind racing. She remembered the loose stone where she'd found the map, the back wall near the hearth, the adobes crumbling. We could dig out, slip past them in the dark. It was desperate, dangerous, but staying meant death or delivering the marker to Rourke. A faint scratching sound came from outside the shuttered window, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap. Jace moved silently to the shutter crack. A small, ragged figure darted away from the cabin wall, vanishing into the sagebrush. Left behind, tucked into a crack in the adobe, was a tightly rolled scrap of paper. Jace retrieved it. Rourke men doubled, watching Hollow Roads. Caleb sealed deal early. Claims marker found tomorrow. Plans to burn homestead after. Blamed Jace for theft and fire. Maeve. Caleb wasn't just discarding them. He was planning their murder to erase his fraud. The solstice deadline was now a death sentence scheduled for Dawn. Dig. Jace ordered, his voice grim. Now. He grabbed the short-handled hoe Elara had used in the garden. They worked frantically but silently at the back wall near the hearth, where the adobe was weakest, their breaths loud in the stillness. The guards' low conversation outside was a constant reminder of the precipice they stood on. Chunks of dried mud and straw crumbled away. Cool night air seeped through the growing hole. Caleb's betrayal is complete. Can Elara and Jace vanish into night? And who can they trust with the truth? Subscribe now. The final showdown is coming. It took agonizing minutes, their hands scraped raw, but they made a hole just large enough to squeeze through. Jace went first, dropping silently onto the hard-packed earth outside, scanning the moonlit scrub. He signaled. Elara took a deep breath, pushing her body through the tight space, the rough edges snagging her worn dress. Fear choked her, but the image of Caleb's cold face, planning her death, fueled her. She tumbled out, Jace catching her arm to steady her silently. They moved like ghosts, keeping low, using the deep shadows cast by the cabin and corral, heading not toward the open flats, but towards the deeper darkness of the ravine they'd explored. It offered cover, and perhaps a place to hide until daylight revealed their next move. The guards' voices faded behind them. The ravine was a black maw in the moonlight. They descended carefully, the familiar scent of damp stone and sage filling Elara's nose, a strange comfort in the terror. Jace led them to the sheltered overhang where they'd found the crate. It felt like the only sanctuary left on Earth. Elara sank against the cool rock wall, gasping quietly, the bill of sale a burning secret against her skin. Jace crouched at the entrance, listening, his silhouette tense against the starlit opening. The relief was temporary, fragile. They were fugitives now, hunted by Rourke's men, Caleb's scheme, and Barlow's vengeance. The vast, indifferent land pressed in. Suddenly, Jace stiffened. He raised a hand, silencing Elara's unspoken question. A sound, not the wind, not an animal. The deliberate crunch of boots on loose scree, approaching from above. More than one pair. A lantern beam sliced through the darkness, probing the ravine floor, sweeping closer to their hiding place. Elara's blood ran cold. They'd been followed, or found. She pressed deeper into the shadows, Jace drawing his knife, his body shielding hers. The light wavered, then steadied, illuminating the entrance to the overhang. A figure stepped into the lantern's glow, tall and broad-shouldered, casting a long, menacing shadow. Not Rourke's scarred man, not a hired gun. Caleb Thorne stood at the mouth of the refuge, his face hard as a surrounding stone, illuminated by the lantern held by a hulking man beside him, Barlow, his features cruel in the flickering light. Caleb's voice, cold in the desert night, cut through the silence like a knife. "Did you truly think hiding in a hole would save you from me, girl? Hand over what you stole, and maybe I'll make your end quick." Barlow's lantern hissed, casting monstrous, swaying shadows across the ravine walls as Caleb Thorne took another step forward, his polished boots crunching on the scree. The cold bore of his six-shooter never wavered from Jace's chest, while Barlow's own gun, aimed at Elara, glinted with malice. Caleb's smile was a knife slash in the gloom. "Last chance, girl," he hissed. "The papers. Or watch your Mongol protector die where he stands." Elara felt Jace's arm tense against hers, a silent promise of defiance written in every scarred line of his body. The air in the rocky refuge thickened with the scent of gun oil, sweat, and a metallic tang of fear. Elara's hand instinctively pressed against the hidden bill of sale in her bodice, the forged signature, a physical brand against her skin. Her father's eyes, devoid of any paternal warmth, held only avarice and contempt. Beside him, Barlow's gaze was fixed on Jace with naked hatred, a living embodiment of the cave-in's dust and Sarah's stolen locket. "Stole nothing, father," Elara stated, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the tense silence. The word father was deliberate, laced with acid. "We found what you buried. Proof you stole this land from Elias Miller. Proof you're trying to cheat Silas Rourke, too." She saw the flicker of unease beneath Caleb's fury. Rourke's name was a vulnerability. Barlow spat into the dust. "Proof burns easy, girl. Just like you too will." His finger tightened on the trigger. Jace moved, not toward the guns, but sideways, a sudden shift that placed him squarely in front of Elara, blocking Barlow's line of fire. His voice, low and dangerous, was aimed solely at Barlow. "Silver Dust Gulch, Barlow. Remember Sarah? Remember how you cut those timbers? How you stole her locket while her body was still warm?" He pulled Sarah's locket from his pocket, the tarnished S catching the lantern light. "This was hers. Found in the dirt you buried it in, along with the gold you sold her things for." He held Barlow's gaze, the years of guilt and rage boiling into a single focused point. "You're not getting away this time." The raw accusation, the tangible evidence of his desecration, struck Barlow like a physical blow. A snarl ripped from his throat. "Liar!" he roared, momentarily shifting his aim from Elara to Jace. It was the split-second distraction Jace needed. Trapped and outgunned, what would you do in Elara and Jace's place? Share your boldest escape plan in the comments. Jace lunged, not for Barlow's gun, but for the lantern in his other hand. His calloused fist slammed into Barlow's wrist. The lantern flew, shattering against the ravine wall in a burst of flame and glass. Darkness plunged over them, punctuated by the sudden, terrifying roar of fire as the spilled oil ignited dry brush. Chaos erupted. Caleb shouted, blinded. Barlow bellowed in rage and pain, stumbling back from the lick of flames. In the disorienting, flickering darkness, Elara acted on pure instinct. She didn't cower. She charged towards Caleb. Years of humiliation, of being deemed worthless, coalesced into a single surge of strength. She slammed her full weight into him, not to knock him down, but unbalance him, her hand darting into his open coat as he staggered. Get off me, you useless cow. Caleb snarled, shoving her away. But it was too late. Elara scrambled back toward the overhang's deeper shadows, clutching a thick, folded document she'd ripped from his inside pocket. The forged territorial deed Rourke held. The fire, fueled by sagebrush, cast hellish, dancing light. Jace and Barlow were locked in a brutal struggle near the flames, silhouettes grappling in the smoke. Caleb, regaining his sight, raised his gun towards Jace's exposed back. "Enough," he bellowed. "Hold it right there, Thorne." A new voice, sharp with authority, rang out from above. Lantern beams swept down into the ravine, illuminating the scene. Maeve stood on the rim, her face grim. Beside her a tall man with a star gleaming on his chest, Sheriff Pike. Behind them, a dozen townsfolk held lanterns and rifles, their faces hard. Among them, the stable boy who'd carried Maeve's warning nodded fiercely at Elara. Maeve pointed a trembling finger. "He's got the proof of his thievery on him, Sheriff, and plans to burn his own daughter alive to cover it." "We heard him." Caleb whirled, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "This is a lie. That woman's a drunkard. That man's a fugitive. That creature is no daughter of mine." Elara stepped forward into the converging lantern light. She held up the bill of sale she'd carried for days, then the forged territorial deed she'd just stolen from Caleb. Her voice, clear and strong, carried over the crackle of the fire and the gas to the onlookers. "This is the truth. The bill of sale Elias Miller never signed. And this," she brandished Caleb's deed, "is the lie Silas Rourke holds, waiting for my father's stolen marker to make it legal. He planned to kill us tonight and burn the homestead to hide it all." She turned her gaze fully on Caleb. No fear left, only cold, righteous anger. "I am not useless. I am not a creature. I am Elara Thorne, and you are the thief." The sheriff moved swiftly, disarming a spluttering Caleb as two deputies clambered down. Below, the fight ended abruptly. Jace emerged from the smoke, Barlow limp and unconscious at his feet, one arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Jace held Sarah's locket tightly in his uninjured hand, his chest heaving, his eyes meeting Elara's. In that look was a lifetime of pain, but also a dawning release. Justice served. Did Elara and Jace's journey inspire you? Share your favorite moment below. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage in the Wild West. The solstice dawn broke over Sagebrush Hollow, not with a deal sealed, but with conspiracy shattered. Caleb Thorne, Silas Rourke, implicated by the documents in Maeve's testimony, and Barlow, wanted for murder and fraud in 3 territories, were hauled away in irons. The territorial judge, arriving post-solstice, declared the Miller land claim fraudulent and void. The land reverted to the territory, but with a provision. Given the hardship endured by those wronged upon it, and their role in exposing the crime, a homestead claim was granted jointly to Elara Thorne and Jace. A week later, under a sky washed clean in blue, Elara stood in the garden patch she'd nurtured. It was larger now. Jace's arm in a sling, but his posture straighter, used a salvage plank to build a new section of fence nearby. The scarred man sneer, her father's cruelty, Barlow's shadow. They belonged to the dust now. Maeve arrived, carrying a basket. "Brought seeds," she announced, her eyes crinkling. "Proper ones. Tomatoes. Maybe even some flowers." She hugged Elara tightly. "Proud of you, child." Elara knelt in the rich, dark earth, the scent of loam and promise filling her senses. She pressed a seed deep, covering it gently. The simple act felt like a sacrament. She was no longer the girl cast out onto Main Street. She was rooted, strong. Jace approached, holding out his hand. Nestled in his palm were the 2 lockets, his and Sarah's. "She wanted a place," he said softly, his gray eyes clear for the first time Elara could remember. "Somewhere safe. To grow things." He placed Sarah's locket into Elara's earth-stained hand. "Keep it safe. For her." Elara closed her fingers around the cool silver. It wasn't a burden. It was a connection, a promise. She looked up at Jace, then at the homestead, the cabin they would repair, the garden they would grow, the life they would build from the ashes of betrayal. The vast land no longer felt indifferent. It felt like home. "Together?" she asked, her voice steady, hopeful. Jace looked at the land, at the woman who had defied a tyrant and unearthed his own redemption. A slow, rare smile touched his lips. "Together," he agreed. As the sun climbed higher, warming the red earth, the only sounds were the whisper of the sagebrush wind and the steady rhythm of a hammer driving a nail into wood, mending what was broken, building what was new. The chains, both seen and unseen, were finally broken. Dawn had come.